Hello again, everybody. Unit 10 is about experiences of life. Before we work with the book, I'd like to present the most important topic of this unit. Before we start with the information, let's start with an exercise for vocabulary. What's this in English? Take a look at these pictures. All right. So we have a dance competition, a UFO, which is unidentified flying object, the United States of America, buy something, call someone, and jail or prison. Here are the answers. And now, using this vocabulary, let's talk about experiences of life. Take a look at this mini board with some questions. Let's read them. First question says, have you ever called your ex in the middle of the night? Have you ever visited someone in jail, in prison? Have you danced in a competition? Have you ever bought something really expensive? Have you ever seen a UFO in the sky? Have you been to the United States? All these questions have something in common. Let's take a look at the verbs. Called, visited, danced. Regular verbs, right? Now let's take a look to the other verbs. Bought, seen, and been. And all these questions have the same auxiliary, which is have. So all these questions are using what we call present perfect tense. All right? And we have to use the verbs in past participle. If you check your lists of verbs, you will remember that we have three different columns: the simple present, the past, and the past participle of the verb, right? Let's take a look, for example, at the verb awake. The past is awoke, and the past participle is awaken. The past of the verb to be, for singulars is was, for plurals is were, and the past participle is been, right? So in the present perfect tense, we will use the past participle of the verb. But in this unit, you will also need the simple past of the verbs. So please study the three columns again to work with Unit 10. All right? And you will remember that for regular verbs, the past and the past participle is exactly the same. The past of answer is answered, and the past participle is answered too. So no problem with the regular verbs. The problem is the irregular verbs that you have to learn and study the three conjugations of the verbs. Now, let's take a look to the possible answers to the questions on the board. No, I have never called my ex in the middle of the night. Yes, we have visited someone in jail. It was our uncle. No, I've never danced in a competition. Here, pay attention to the use in a contraction of the auxiliary have, which is exactly the same. Next, I've never bought anything expensive, but my brother has bought expensive comic books. He's spent thousands in comic books. Now, pay attention to the auxiliary of the third persons in singular.
Has, and the contraction, similar to the contraction of the verb to be, but this is not the verb to be. This is the contraction of the auxiliary has.
All right? And pay attention in the verbs of all these answers. Called, visited, danced, bought. They are also in past participle. So, affirmatives, negatives, and interrogatives in present perfect tense use the auxiliaries have and has, and the main verbs always
case in past participle.
So, when do we use each auxiliary?
We use have with the persons I, you, we, and they. And the auxiliary has for the third persons of the singular, he, she, and it.
Let's take a look to the structure of affirmative, negative, and interrogative statements in present perfect. Affirmative. I have eaten a lot today. Negative. We haven't eaten anything today. Interrogative. Have you eaten anything? Let's write some examples with third persons. Mike has drunk too much soda. Susan hasn't drunk any water. Has Tim drunk any juice? Alright, so let's analyze the structure of these statements. Affirmatives. First, the subject, I, you, he, she, it, we, they. The auxiliary, have or has, verb in past participle, and complement. Subject, auxiliary, verb in past participle, and the complement. Negatives. Person plus haven't or hasn't, plus the verb in past participle, and then your complement. Person, haven't or hasn't, verb in past participle, and the complement. And you know that for questions, we switch the auxiliary with the subject. So, for interrogatives, we start with have or has, the person, the verb in past participle, and your complement. And in case you have WH questions, well then the WH question goes to the beginning of the question. For example, where have you been? WH, auxiliary, person, the verb in past participle. Where has John lived lately? WH, auxiliary, the person, the verb in past participle, and the complement. So it follows the same structure, but WH goes to the beginning, and then you continue with the question, all right? There are some adverbs that we usually use in present perfect. Take a look to the board again. Ever and never, ready. We use them in the first questions. Have you ever been to the United States? No, I have never been to the United States. But in conversation number 4 of your book, you have the use of already and yet. Look at these examples. Have you eaten lunch yet? Have you already eaten lunch? These two questions have exactly the same meaning. These two are the same. But the questions can be different. Yes, I've already had lunch today. No, we haven't eaten anything yet. Analyze these statements. For affirmative statements, we use already. And for negative statements, we use yet. And for the interrogatives, we can use already or yet. But the important is the position of these adverbs. In what part of the statements, in what part of the sentence do we use these adverbs? Well, we use yet at the end of the statement. And we use already before the main verb. It doesn't matter if it's affirmative, negative, or interrogative. This is the position where you have to use these adverbs. Let's work with a couple of exercises before we work with the book, all right? Please take your notebook and copy these sentences. Here are the answers. Now, to talk about our experiences of life, to express what we have lived, we use the present perfect tense. But to present additional information about one experience, we do not continue using present perfect tense. We have to use simple past. Take a look to the board again. Remember the question, have you ever visited someone in jail? Well, this is present perfect, right? Have you ever? And the answer was yes, we have visited someone in jail. But then we said it was our uncle. Was is simple past because it's additional information. And if we give more additional information, we have to use simple past. In 2012, he was accused to steal a cow. But the next year, his lawyer proved that he didn't do it. All this is simple past. My uncle hasn't been in problems again. Well, this is only the experience. All right? So we can use present perfect. But all the additional information, we use simple past. Now let's work with an exercise with present perfect tense or simple past. Copy the sentences in your notebook, please. Here are the answers. Now pay attention in all these statements. When you have additional information, we also have indicators of time. 2 years ago, past, I got. Yesterday, he was busy. He had a lot of homework. Last winter, they went. Last week, he painted. Yesterday, he did. In 2014, my brother got sick. He had a surgery. So, if you have indicators of time, use simple past. And to talk about the experience, use present perfect. All right? Now let's work with your